Hey guys, my name is Sophie and I am a senior biology major here at Kalamazoo College, and today I will be talking your ear off about plant and animal interactions. We'll talk about the basics of these interactions, potential outcomes, and I'll identify some examples for each one. After our introduction to the topic, we'll get into a tier list. First, an objective list ranking interactions based on how necessary they are for an organism's survival, and lastly, I'll do a subjective list, where I'll rank each example based simply on how cool I think they are. Let's get into it. We've heard of plant and animal interactions before, a caterpillar munching on your tomato plant, or a squirrel bearing acorns and walnuts as they bustle about before winter. But these kinds of interactions can be a lot more intricate. My goal for today's video is to make sure you understand all the different kinds of interactions that exist in this big world and what they mean for the plants and animals that are affected by them. Let's start with a super basic introduction to these kinds of interactions. There are two components here. We need a plant and we need an animal. A plant we will consider as a multicelled organism that primarily relies on photosynthesis. Most plants that we'll be talking about have those basic structures we're all familiar with: a stem, leaves, roots, and flowers, and they make seeds to reproduce. The second component to these interactions is an animal. There are lots of ways to define what truly makes something an animal, but to make it simple, in this video, I'll define one as a multicell eukaryote that can move, mostly because of the presence of muscles, eat, and respond to their environment. This basic idea of an animal opens up potential interactions, occurring with a list of over 1.5 million described species of animals here on Earth. When we think of animals, if you're like me, you probably think of a vertebrate first, in particular a mammal. Maybe you thought of a dog or cat. Maybe you were cool and thought of a fish. But if we want to think about the most prolific animal in terms of species number, what should we be thinking of? Insects. These creepy crawlers make up 3/4 of the entire animal kingdom, with over 1 million defined species worldwide. Here are some cool infographics that describe the different phyla, or groups of organisms, based on set characteristics. We see that massive makeup of insects in a proportionally much smaller group of vertebrates and invertebrates, and the other groups like spiders and mollusks. And when we look at insects alone, we see an incredibly diverse and dense makeup. Now, let's think about the interaction between a plant and an animal. For an interaction to occur, a few things are required. Proximity is the most prevalent aspect. The plant and the animal need to physically interact. So we won't be considering potential interactions between a fish in the Atlantic and a sequoia tree in California. That just doesn't make any sense. So now that we have narrowed down our understanding to be location-based, we have to understand the reasoning behind these interactions. As simple as it may be to say that things just happen, that leaves behind a lot of nuance and fascinating relationships that I would like to dive into. So why do plants interact with animals and vice versa? Most of the time, these interactions are based on benefits for one or both of the organisms, but a net positive isn't true for every interaction. Outcomes can be negative, positive, or even null, meaning no effect. Let's get a glimpse of all the possible interactions, and with that, I'll provide an example for each one. Let's start by considering symbiosis, a term you may be familiar with already, which refers to a close association between two organisms. These organisms interact, typically because of a shared use of the same space. They may not live in the same area, but they do spend frequent time together. Within symbiotic relationships, there is the potential to achieve net positive outcomes, including mutualism, commensalism, and equilism. Then there are potential net negative outcomes, where one or both of the organisms faces potential harm: parasitism, competition, and amensalism. A mutualistic interaction refers to the positive interplay for both plant and animal. Most people think of a clownfish that lives in a sea anemone, but be careful, those anemones might look like plants, but they're actually invertebrates. So let's consider other examples. The majority of plant-pollinator interactions are mutualistic. A bee, moth, butterfly, or any other pollinator, there's over 350,000 pollinator species in the world. They interact with a plant, feeding on the provided nectar, and collect pollen on their bodies. This trapped pollen is transferred to other plants of the same species, and the act of pollination has occurred, allowing the plant to reproduce. The pollinator is fed, and the plant is pollinated. Two happy campers. Commensalism refers to an interaction where one organism benefits and the other receives no benefit nor harm. For example, those little burrs that you may find on your curious dog's nose after they've been poking around outside may be burdock seeds. The seed is engaging in an act called hitchhiking, and does so thanks to tiny hooks on the surface of the seed. These hooks latch on to the fur of a wide range of animals that then carry them far and wide, aiding in seed dispersal. The further the bird travels, the less competition is faced from daughter to parent plant, and new areas can be colonized for growth. This is a huge win for the plant, and doesn't seem to cause any harm to the animal. There is a subtype of commensalistic practice that some organisms engage in called equilism. In this dynamic, an inquilin lives in or on a host but does not harm its host. In carnivorous pitcher plants, such as the purple pitcher plant, you can find pitcher plant mosquitoes in the water that is contained by the plant. This water provides a habitat for the mosquito to live in order to complete its pre-adult life cycle. More research is beginning to elucidate potential changes in the microcommunity of organisms found within this water, but it's clear that the mosquito causes no harm to the plant itself. Next, we'll consider potential negative outcomes for either of the organisms involved. Parasitism is something we've all heard of, but you're probably more familiar with animal-animal interactions. In this relationship, the parasite benefits at the expense of the host, sometimes even resulting in the death of the host. But there are plant-animal interactions of the same type. For example, there are plant parasitic nematodes, microscopic worms that have been found to attack all parts of the plants: roots, stems, leaves, fruits, and seeds. Let's focus on root knot nematodes. These little guys are found in the soil, where the surrounding environment is hot or has a relatively short winter. The larvae infect the roots of the plants, causing galls to develop. A gall is a swollen growth found in the outer tissue of the plant. From these galls, nutrients leak, leaving the plant weaker, susceptible to death or decreasing product yield. The nematodes have found a place to hatch, but it's at the expense of the plant's health, a perfect representation of parasitism. Now, let's consider competition. This occurs when organisms compete for resources, food, water, habitat, maybe even a mate. This makes the most sense when we consider an animal versus another animal, or a plant competing against another plant. But there's instances out there where plants and animals are in direct competition with one another. Let's take a look at the wetland region of southern Florida. Here, the wolf spider is found, and it eats all types of insects, ants, crickets, flies, and a lot of other creepy crawlers it can get a hold of. Now, at the same time, the pink sundew, an insect-eating plant, will trap these same types of critters and consume them after the secretion of their digestive enzymes. These two organisms, wolf spider and pink sundew, are now faced head-to-head and are in direct competition for food. A study showed that when the pink sundew lives in an area without spiders, they produce more leaves and a greater number of seeds because of their increased energy intake. When both organisms face each other head-to-head, they engage in an interaction resulting in a negative outcome, because there is a lower amount of available energy due to their competition. Amensalism, a less commonly discussed symbiotic interaction, occurs when two organisms interact, resulting in the injury or death of one and no net gain or loss from the other. We can visualize this with an example of any kind of large cattle. As a cow walks along a pasture looking for food or water, it's trampling on grass. The relationship between cattle and grass in this scenario is amensalistic. The blades of grass are broken off, injuring the plant, and the interaction doesn't benefit or harm the cow in any way. Now that we understand the core symbiotic relationships between plants and animals, let's briefly consider predation habits. Before we get into it, let's think about how this interaction will present itself in every variation, no matter the specifics. The predator will receive a positive input at the expense of the prey. The following examples are here to give you an idea of what these interactions may look like. It's important to note, though, that these classifications are not necessarily mutually exclusive. Predators learn to prey on lots of different things, and being choosy isn't the best choice when nutrients are limited due to competition. Browsing refers to the predator eating the leaves, twigs, and fruits of woody plants. The largest species of antelope in Africa, the eland, has a flexible, herbivorous diet that varies depending on the season. During the wet season, they browse on the leaves, fruits, and seeds of plum trees. Grazing references an herbivore eating low-growing plants. Capybaras are known to eat an abundant amount of grass. Grass is easy for them to digest, and they can eat nearly 8 pounds of grass a day. So now that we understand the types of interactions that plants and animals engage in with each other, let's think about the necessity of these arrangements. There's a spectrum of where a particular interaction can fall along in consideration of its necessity. An obligate interaction refers to one that is required for the existence of a species. In terms of a tier list, all obligate interactions immediately fall in the S tier. Other interactions are facultative, meaning they are used but not essential, and some fit into neither category. It'll be up to my discretion to determine exactly where these interactions fall along the list, and they may be subject to a matter of opinion to make a final decision. Let's review all our interactions once more. We have pollinators, burdock seeds, pitcher plant mosquitoes, root knot nematodes, the pink sundew and wolf spider, cow walking on grass, eland, and a capybara. Let's start at the top and make our way down. Our mutualism example, general pollinators, is a perfect example of an obligate relationship. A plant relies on these pollinators to engage in pollination and cannot reproduce without them. Though not every plant in the world has an obligatory relationship with pollinators, the majority of flowering, cone-bearing, and vegetable plants require pollination to reproduce. Also, the pollinators are provided with a source of food for this interaction, which is necessary for their survival. Therefore, we see pollinators as an immediate S-tier ranking. Next, let's look at our example for commensalism. the burdock seed. The burdock latching onto the animal is important for seed dispersal, but seed dispersal is not required for success, though it does increase the chance of success. This interaction is not obligatory or facultative. The interaction increases the success for the plant, but does nothing for the animal. So we'll put it at C. Next up, the pitcher plant mosquito, an inquilin living in its host, the pitcher plant. This example is not obligatory. The mosquito can find water to live its pre-adult life cycle in many different places, and the plant doesn't necessarily benefit from the presence of the mosquito. The situation works well for the mosquito, though, and provides decent shelter and sustenance, so we'll put it C. On to the root knot nematodes, a form of parasitism. Parasites can sometimes engage in facultative interactions, but this example is obligatory for the parasite. The parasite can only lead a successful life when it finds itself with hefty roots to parasitize. This comes at the expense of the plant, though, so we'll knock it down a peg from our mosquitoes. D tier. The definition of competition, resulting in a net negative for both organisms, makes it clear to us that the interaction between the pink sundew and the wolf spider is not obligatory. It's also not facultative. Competition is a fascinating interaction that lowers the fitness of both organisms, placing both species at risk of population depletion if they cannot properly handle this interaction. No species benefit, therefore F tier. We can think of amensalism in a similar light to competition through the lens of this tier list. The cow receives no benefit from walking on the grass. This interaction is not required for the cow, and this interaction comes at the detriment of the grass. The grass would much prefer to go without this interaction, as it has to focus its resources on rebuilding the damage from the interaction instead of growing. These organisms are not reliant on one another. E tier. Moving on to predatory behavior. This can get tricky, but we have specific examples to base our decision off of. Let's take a look at our browsing eland first. As I stated earlier, elands engage in this behavior specifically during the wet season. This is when components available to browse are at their most nutritious stage, and therefore provide the most energy to the eland. These antelopes have a flexible diet and do not rely on browsing behavior for all the times of the year. They do engage in browsing, though, for some time, but this interaction does come at the cost of the plant it's browsing on. It's not mutually obligatory and only serves its purpose for a portion of the year, so let's say E tier. Lastly, let's take a look at the capybara and grass grazing interaction. The diet of the capybara is much more limited. They are known to graze grasses and water plants, most of which fulfills a portion of the obligate perspective, but they do munch on fruits too, which makes them browsers as well, just a little less flexible than our aforementioned elands. Because their digestive system is built to best handle the digestion of grasses, considering the fact that predation does not support the prey, let's put capybaras and grass at E tier ranking. Now, at lightning speed, let's disregard this tier list and consider these interactions at face value, considering just how cool they really are. Pollinators are cool, but let's not give too much credit to those honeybees. Those little guys aren't even native to America, and they happen to be really good competitors knocking off native pollinators from flowers, preventing our native bugs from getting food. Like I said, the world of pollinators is huge, consisting of moths, bats, birds, and pollination occurs at all times of the day, even when you're fast asleep. And let's not forget all the ways pollinators help us humans out. Our meals look a lot less colorful without the hard work of all our pollinating friends. Maybe I'm biased because I love a good apple in the fall. A tier. I have never appreciated burrs as I have now looking at them in this light. Their morphological formation of hooks is a pretty impressive evolutionary feat that I do have to respect. I hate when they get stuck in my hair or my clothes, though. C tier. Okay, now onto pitcher plant and its accompanying mosquito. Ugh, mosquitoes are not my favorite. They suck blood when they lay eggs, they carry some awful diseases. I just don't like them. But I can appreciate that they contribute to biodiversity and even better serve as prey for lots of cool predators. E tier. Next up, nematodes. I'd like to remind everyone that this is purely subjective. Nematodes are fondly correlated with an amazing SpongeBob episode. They ate his whole pineapple home, but it was okay because SpongeBob watered a seed with his tears and a new pineapple sprouted. Pretty awesome in my book. But real-life nematodes kind of freak me out. C tier. Now onto the pink sundew and the wolf spider. I think competition between a plant and an animal is pretty cool, and a rather hard condition to come by. B tier. Now, the cow walking on grass? Pretty mundane. F tier. Moving on to predatory behavior. Eland first. Once again, pretty mundane behavior. But there is some research between the eland and the plum tree. They like munching on plums. I think that's pretty cute. D tier. And lastly, the capybara. I think specialization is pretty cool, especially when it comes to digestion and the processing of nutrients. They make the most of their circumstances, which is pretty impressive. I'll say C tier. All right, y'all, we've had a busy day. We've learned a lot about plants and animals and how they interact with each other, and you've gotten a glimpse into my mind to see just how I perceive the nature of these interactions. Thanks for coming along. You will most likely not be seeing me again. This took a lot more effort than I thought it would. See ya!